All right, y'all, welcome to the Scott Horton Show. I am the director of the Libertarian Institute, editorial director of antiwar.com, author of the book Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, and I've recorded more than 5,000 interviews going back to 2003, all of which are available at scotthorton.org. You can also sign up for the podcast feed. The full archive is also available at youtube.com/Scott Horton Show. All right, you guys, introducing Dan Caldwell. He is senior advisor to Concerned Veterans of America. He was a Marine in Iraq War II, and he wrote this big piece for the American Conservative magazine, Trump Should Get Out of Afghanistan Before Inauguration Day. Welcome back to the show. How you doing, Dan?
I'm doing well, Scott. Thank you for having me on.
Happy to have you here. So you wrote this when they were kind of rumor-mongering about maybe getting out of places, and then we've come to find out that, in fact, we're only looking at a slight fluctuation in troop numbers and no change in strategy whatsoever.
Well, I think the reduction in Afghanistan is a significant amount, but it is not ending the war and it is not going to zero. And in Iraq, it's not really much of a change. So that is disappointing. Now, I would be more excited about the drawdown in Afghanistan at 2,500 if I had confidence that President Biden would follow the agreement that was signed between the United States and the Taliban in Doha, Qatar in February, which mandates a full withdrawal from Afghanistan by May, going to 2,500 and then going down to zero over the next couple of months following January when we're supposed to hit that level. I would be comfortable with that if I had confidence in the incoming Biden administration, but I don't. So I'm still pushing and hoping that there are people who can convince President Trump to ultimately go to zero.
Yeah, well, you know, a lot of us were pretty hopeful when we heard that Douglas Macgregor was named senior advisor to the new Secretary of Defense. It seemed like if there's a man capable of figuring out a way to make the president's orders to end a war to actually happen in the last couple of 10 weeks here, he might be the guy to do it. But if Trump's not willing to give the order, then there's only so much Macgregor can do, you know?
That's true. There is also a tremendous amount of resistance from the uniformed military. I think to an extent when there were leaks about the warning order to go to 2,500, in many ways that was an attempt to box President Trump in, but ultimately you're right. It's on him to make the orders, and he can make an order to go to zero. Circling back on something I said earlier, I would hope that as we get to January, the president can issue orders for a full withdrawal beyond the 2,500. So say once we hit 2,500, January 15th, he would then issue orders to say get the remaining 2,500 out by February or March, and then dare Joe Biden to undo it. Now, again, like he could do that tomorrow. There's still a window here to get a full withdrawal that can be accomplished in a that can be accomplished logistically and safely. But if that's not going to happen next couple weeks, then the best option is for Trump to come in the last couple weeks of administration and issue more withdrawal orders.
Yeah. This is the thing about it, right, is I saw a clip on CNN. It's just hilarious watching these women talk about this, that Trump is putting our soldiers in danger by bringing some of them out of there. And I'm not sure if it didn't seem like they were saying, yeah, because now they might not even have enough for their own force protection. It was more like their plane could fall out of the sky over the Atlantic on the way home or something. They didn't explain.
Yeah, you had Senator Duckworth make a similar argument that somehow it's safer leaving them in Iraq and Afghanistan, that you're putting them at risk by bringing more of them home. And it's absurd. What it is it's hysterical anti-Trumpism. Whatever you think of Trump, there are a lot of people who are opposed to this just simply because it's Trump doing it, including a lot of people that 2, 3, 4 years ago were pounding the table about forever wars, about how we need to end, the war in Afghanistan. For example, you have this congressman from my home state, Arizona, Ruben Gallego. He's a Marine Corps veteran like me, served in Iraq like me. In 2018, he was saying how we need to end the Afghanistan war. Well, 2 years later, he is supporting the atrocious Cheney-Crow Amendment, which would in effect force the president to keep sending Americans to die in Afghanistan. So it's disgusting. And yes, this isn't a full withdrawal, but it is still better than nothing. And the hysterical outrage to it from some people in the media and even people, again, who supported ending endless wars, it's just it's so discouraging, but at some level it shouldn't be surprising.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? That may be the best thing about it, right, is just the way it draws out these cretins in the media and shows them for what they are. It's one of those great clarifying moments where some of us get to watch how confused the others are. You know what? I will give credit to Mother Jones. I Googled your name up before the show, and they have a good article quoting you saying, hey, you guys are for getting out of Afghanistan, right? And the author, it wasn't Kevin Drum, I don't think. I forget who it was. But said, yeah, that's right. We do want out of Afghanistan. We wanted out of Afghanistan before. We want out of Afghanistan now. And it doesn't matter if somebody spins this as we're somehow praising Donald Trump. It is what it is. We want as few troops there as possible. We want them all out as soon as possible. So that's good to see. A little bit of principle here.
Yeah, it was good to see people from the left, some of them speak up and support this. It's good to see that there are still people who want to take a principled position on this, despite who's in, despite the recent election results and who's coming to the Oval Office. And really, there needs to be a strong, progressive, left-wing anti-war movement in place to check Biden's bad instincts on foreign policy. And it's my hope that coalition will hold together, especially in the first 6 months of his term, where there's going to have to be decisions made about what we're going to do with the Doha Agreement in Afghanistan, what the future of our presence in Iraq is going to look like, what the future of our presence in Syria is going to look like, which obviously I hope there is no presence in any of those countries. But Biden just has had terrible instincts on foreign policy over the year, and some of the people he's surrounded himself with. Biden during the campaign tried to make himself out to be this closet restrainer within the Obama White House. And I just think the actual history of his time in the Senate and in the White House doesn't really support that narrative. And also, just the fact that he surrounded himself with some of the most hawkish and pro-intervention members of the Obama administration who advised him should show that there's really not much hope that he will just instinctively pursue more restraint. So really the only thing that I think can compel him is a strong, primarily left-wing driven political movement to check him on foreign policy with support from the right as well, too. Mm-hmm. And that is really our only hope over the next 6 months to continue some of the good things that's happened under President Trump.
Hey, y'all, here's the thing. Donate $100 to the Scott Horton Show, and you can get a QR code commodity disc as my gift to you. It's a 1-ounce silver disc with a QR code on the back. You take a picture of it with your phone, and it gives you the instant spot price and lets you know what that ounce of silver is worth on the market in Federal Reserve notes in real time. It's the future of currency in the past, too. CommodityDiscs.com, or just go to scotthorton.org/donate. Hey guys, Scott Horton here for ExpandDesigns.com. Harley Abbott and his crew do an outstanding job designing, building, and maintaining my sites, and they'll do great work for you. You need a new website? Go to ExpandDesigns.com/Scott and save $500. Hey guys, check out Listen and Think audiobooks. They're at listenandthink.com and, of course, on audible.com. And they feature my book, Fool's Errand, Time to End the War in Afghanistan, as well as brand new out Inside Syria by our friend Reese Ehrlich, and a lot of other great books mostly by libertarians there. Reese might be one exception, but essentially they're all libertarian audiobooks. And here's how you can get a lifetime subscription to Listen and Think audiobooks. Just donate $100 to The Scott Horton Show at scotthorton.org/donate. Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, the massive invention on the side of the anti-war right was Trump denouncing the Bushes for getting us into Iraq War II and the rest of it. And without him, the most powerful the most powerful Republicans are people like Lindsey Graham and Tom Cotton and Crenshaw and all these hawks, Crow, as you mentioned, all these people, Duckworth. Sorry, she's a Democrat. I confuse them. They all look alike to me. But anyway, so it's all a bunch of hawkish Republicans.
So is Jason Crow, but sometimes you can't tell some of his language these days.
I'm sorry, yeah.
From Lindsey Graham, and that's unfortunate.
Right. But anyway, yeah, I lost my train of thought. Once I started naming hawks in Congress and I started bleeding across lines, my point was going to be that, you know, the tradition is that the Republicans attack the Democrats for not being horrible enough. Say, for example, like John McCain attacking Obama for not doing enough for al-Qaeda in Syria that whole time and this kind of thing. And so I wonder, you know, whether the anti-war right, how is this going to work out? Can Bring Our Troops Home.us and Concerned Veterans of America and other groups on, you know, the libertarian leaning right and this kind of deal really make sure that the, you know, sick and tired of this already movement inside the Republican Party stays dominant rather than giving way to a bunch of hawks? Because after all, Republican politicians like to talk tough and Republican voters like tough talk a lot of the time, you know?
Yeah, I hope that this coalition can stick together on the right. I think there are some good signs that it will. I think that there's going to be a battle for the soul of the Republican Party's foreign policy over the next few years leading up to the 2024 election. I think that of the policy debates that are going to occur within the Republican Party, there's going to be discussions around economics, you know, trade policy, you know, social policy and things like that. I think the battle over foreign policy is going to be the most fierce. And right now, I think the restrainers, the realists, have the advantage. I think that having 4 years of Trump basically railing against endless war, railing against our failed wars in the Middle East, even if his record on actually ending those wars was less than perfect, your grassroots conservatives have absorbed that. They absorbed Tucker Carlson railing against the wars, Laura Ingraham railing against the wars. You have outlets like the Federalist, who's become increasingly non-interventionist. You've had, you know, Washington Examiner and a lot of mainstream conservative outlets, including Breitbart, feature more and more voices that sound more like Rand Paul than Liz Cheney. So I think there's been some positive developments. And then just at the end of the day, you can't ignore the polling. You can't ignore the fact that voters time and again, even if foreign policy isn't their top issue, they say in these polls, and again, I know that a lot of polls proved inaccurate, but the numbers are so overwhelming, there's clearly something there. They say they want a more restrained foreign policy. So the political incentives are there. You have groups like, you know, Concerned Veterans for America, our friends at Bring Our Troops Home, and other groups on the right, including groups like Freedom Works and National Taxpayer Union, really coming together and forming a solid coalition that can activate people both at the grassroots level and then apply pressure at the grass tops that can hopefully bring about some change. But it's going to be a tough fight. You know, here in D.C., there's still a lot of entrenched interest. The blob is still very powerful. You have a lot of people that are really invested in the status quo, and they're not going to go quietly. So it's going to be intense. But I'm more optimistic than pessimistic that we can move the Republican Party to a better place. In some ways, Joe Biden being more interventionist will help with that. I'm not hoping that happens. I at the end of the day, want the wars to end, and I don't care what party does it. But if he is more interventionist, I do think that it will hasten the Republican Party's move back to really some of its roots, under Senator Taft, or more like, Rand Paul, Pat Buchanan, that it might push them back that way.
Yeah. Hey, Earth to Rand Paul. Could use a little bit of leadership on the libertarianish right here, dude.
I think Rand's done a really good job, and I actually got to say, one of the reasons why we probably didn't wind up bombing Iran earlier this year or the year before was because of Rand Paul getting on the phone at the right time. Him and Tucker Carlson, I think, deserve a lot of credit for that.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. And really, the last few years have been his very best, for sure.
Yeah. He played a role in moving President Trump away from some of the bad decisions he made in the first 2 years. And I think that if you look at the last 2 years of the Trump administration versus the first two, there's been a lot of things that have happened that, some have been completed, some haven't, that are, really good for our foreign policy. It's just a question of whether they're going to be undermined under President Biden. And again, I think the evidence is that they will.
Oh, yeah. I was just talking with Kevin Gostola earlier where he did this great write-up of not Susan Rice and Samantha Power and Tony Blinken and the very top guys, but more, as he called them, the grunts, the people who are going to end up being the Deputy Secretary of Defense for Policy and the Undersecretary of State for European Affairs and the whatever the hell, all these people. And, man, they're terrible. And they all are, working for think tanks that are financed by arms manufacturers. And it's just straight down the line. They're essentially all Truman national security Democrats, as far to the right as you can go on war in the general sense, not in the sense we're talking about. Without just being Republicans, really.
Yeah, even in some cases even worse. That they've worked at institutions that are significantly funded by foreign governments, whether it's the UAE, Qatar in particular, Turkey.
Yeah, good point.
A lot of those countries have an interest in us remaining enmeshed in these wars because it benefits them. And, when obviously companies like Raytheon, Lockheed, Boeing, they give a lot, but the amount of foreign money that just flows through some of these think tanks is just astounding.
Right.
And that creates even worse incentives in some of the funding from arms manufacturers.
Right. Yeah. And that's the whole irony of all of this, right, is that there's still something to the argument about the democratic process in Washington, D.C. works. It just works for, the squeakiest wheel. And that's never the American people. It's usually Saudi Arabia and Israel, sometimes England. But it's never us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
And when you say, when you're referring to these astronomical sums of money, it's chump change to them, right? You're talking a few million here and there. So you have like some think tank weenie is making $500,000 a year, something like that, which is huge for him. But for Northrop Grumman or for the Emir of Qatar, that's nothing, right? They just write all this off as just like nickels. Remainders on the ends of their checks after the decimal point is enough to bribe a whole town full of these goons to write their studies and justify their policies.
Yeah, there's sadly a lot of truth in that. Sometimes they'll take money from countries that hate each other. They'll take money from countries that have differing interests. Sometimes if you see a think tank shift the tone, it's almost on a certain region. It's almost a sign they got a new funding source. Interestingly, a lot of people, I think, I think there's sometimes a focus on certain countries and which ones yield influence. And I think that really you got to look at the Gulf Arab states and, countries like Qatar. And it's interesting because a lot of the people at these think tanks will jump out and accuse people, who believe in restraint as, being anti-Semitic or anti-Israel, which I think is ridiculous. but at the same time, they're taking money from some of the most anti-Semitic regimes in the world. And that's a huge problem that we have within the foreign policy community, is that this funding and some of these other incentives undermine really good, solid research. Now, look, any institution that's privately funded is going to have to, in some ways, take signals from their donors. But the foreign influence in particular is particularly nefarious within the foreign policy establishment.
Well, you know what? I think people know that Concerned Veterans of America is sponsored by the Kochs, and people might be curious as to what influence they have over what you guys say.
Well, I mean, it's open knowledge that we're part of what is called the Stand Together community. Charles Koch has long been an advocate of less intervention abroad. I think the last time I was on your show, I talked about how actually the first political ad he paid for was against the Vietnam War. And he's funded a lot of research and institutions that want to push for a new foreign policy, and that's open knowledge. I've never received a call or, been told by anybody that you have to pursue this. What we do is we come up with ideas and plans, and we, funnel them up the chain, and that's how it ultimately works. I think that we have been able to, because of the funding that we receive, which isn't just from one donor, we have a lot of freedom to do a lot of things and challenge the status quo. So in many ways, we're blessed to have donors that give us a lot of leeway, that their only interest is really in improving our foreign policy. And we aren't beholden to a foreign government or beholden to arms manufacturers or, other special interests. We have dedicated group of donors that ultimately want to see us enter endless wars, pursue a more realist and restrained foreign policy, and who ultimately understand that the warfare state feeds the welfare state and creates, war abroad feeds big government at home. And so they understand the interconnectivity of those issues. So, again, it's open knowledge. We don't hide it. If people don't want to take what I'm saying seriously because of that relationship, that's fine. That's their choice. But I think our record speaks for itself. And, I think that we've proven that we're serious about this and don't have an ulterior agenda.
Well, look, I think it makes your argument stronger. I mean, the reality is, to me, I don't know the reality. It seems like what you're saying probably, ought to be mildly surprising to people who lean left. Oh, the Kochs, the billionaire Republican oligarchs. If they are anti-war, it's got to be out of principle, right? Because there's plenty of money to be made in war if you're, that political. But as you said, they're not arms manufacturers. They make tires and carpet and sell oil and, mostly just actual capitalist things in the market. They may have some investments in some of these military industrial complex firms, but they're certainly not leaders in that area. And so I think it makes it more credible, just like it makes it more credible that you lean, I don't know how much, I'm not trying to categorize you, but not left anyway, and that you're a Marine veteran of Iraq War II, and so you know about what you're speaking about. And, to me, for liberals who are turned off by the idea of anti-war right-wingers, you ought to just look at it like what a great group of people to invoke. That, look, even all these Republicans say that we're right and smart. And, in fact, this guy Caldwell, he's been to the war and back. And he says we're right, so we're right, and that just makes your argument that much more powerful. You can, in fact, leftists can invoke anti-war right-wingers in order to beat liberal Democrats over the head and say, how can you be to the right of Rand Paul, that right-wing extremist, right? This kind of thing in order to try to keep your liberal Democrats in line. So, we all need each other and have our roles to play, and I'd be happy to take some Coke money. I never have, but for my little institute. But yeah, I don't think that that's a conflict at all. Of course, the Kochs have long been financiers of the Cato Institute, and Doug Bondo and Ted Carpenter and those guys are the very best we have. No question about that. So, I think that that's great, and I think, I hope it makes what you're doing appealing to more people on the right. That this isn't a Michael Moore funded project. This is a Charles Koch funded project. That doesn't sound too commie, does it? Maybe you ought to let this guy Caldwell have his say,
Yeah, that's a good way to say it, to describe it, I think. I would say that there's a really good transpartisan coalition right now. I think there's a lot of people on the left that, have put aside differences on other issues to work with us, and because we recognize the same problems with American foreign policy. I will say, though, that obviously there are certain big businesses that, benefit from our current foreign policy, and that can't be ignored. But I think there's also business people across the country who also recognize that, the increasing intervention abroad in the long term doesn't benefit our country, especially when it comes to our nation's finances, the other impacts it has on the economy, the increasing growth of the state, and that has bad impacts on the free market down the road.
Right.
And so you do have, I think, an awareness among a certain class of business people, and that's increasing there. But, in a lot of cases, even Charles Koch would say this himself, is that there are really bad incentives for big business to support bad policies that may benefit them in the short term, whether it's cronyism or the warfare state. And it's to the detriment of the country, but in the long term, the check always comes due.
Right. Absolutely right. And we see that in so many cases, too. From, the cameras on the street corners to the perpetual wars and all these things. It's a self-licking ice cream cone, right? I don't know who originally coined that phrase, but it's just the perfect libertarian phrase to describe the economics of politics and bureaucracy. That it's all self-justification and search for an excuse, basically.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. All right, listen, you're doing great work, and I really appreciate your great article about this, and I do hope, look, I know a lot of people must have read this, and I hope more people do read it in the American Conservative magazine. Trump should get out of Afghanistan before Inauguration Day, and you're right that it's not too late. So far, he's only pulling 500 out of Iraq and, 2,500 or so, or 2,000 or so out of Afghanistan. But it's not over yet, and so it's still possible that some pressure could be raised. Tell people how they can participate in what you guys are doing there.
There are two good ways. So you can go to our website at www.cv4a.org. Go to our Action Center. You can use some of the applications we have built there to contact your member of Congress in the White House in support of getting out of Afghanistan. And then you can go to our Facebook page at Concerned Vets for America. Just search Concerned Veterans for America on Facebook and follow our Facebook page. And there's lots of articles you can share, lots of videos you can watch, and opportunities to take action.
Right on. Okay, well, thanks very much again for your time, Dan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Scott.
All right, you guys, that is Dan Caldwell. Again, his articles at the American Conservative. Trump should get out of Afghanistan before Inauguration Day. Again, a Marine Corps veteran of Iraq War II and senior advisor to Concerned Veterans for America. The Scott Horton Show, Anti-War Radio, can be heard on KPFK 90.7 FM in LA, APSradio.com, antiwar.com, scotthorton.org, and libertarianinstitute.org.